Isabella was short but of strong, stocky build, of a very fair complexion, and had a hair colour that was between strawberry blonde and auburn, although some portraits show her as a brunette. Her daughters Joanna and Catherine were thought to resemble her the most. Isabella maintained an austere, temperate lifestyle, and her religious spirit influenced her the most in life.
The question of Isabella's marriage was not a new one. She made her debut in the matrimonial market at the age of 6, with betrothal to Ferdinand, the youngest son of John II of Navarre. Now, at that time, the two kings, Henry and John, were eager to show their mutual love and confidence, and they believed that this double alliance would make their eternal friendship obvious to the world. This arrangement, however, did not last long.
After years of meddling from others trying to use Isabella as a pawn in their power-hungry plans, on the 18th of October 1469, a formal betrothal took place. Because Isabella and Ferdinand were second cousins, they stood within the prohibited degrees of consanguinity, and the marriage would not be legal unless a dispensation from the Pope was obtained.
With the help of the Valencian Cardinal Rodrigo Borgia, Isabella and Ferdinand were presented with a supposed papal bull by Pius II, who had died in 1464, authorising Ferdinand to marry within the third degree of consanguinity, making their marriage legal.
Afraid of opposition, Isabella eloped from the court of Henry with the excuse of visiting her brother Alfonso's tomb in Avia. Ferdinand, on the other hand, crossed Castile in secret disguised as a servant. They were married immediately upon reuniting, and on the 19th of October 1469 at the Palacio de los Vivero in the city of Valladolid.
When Isabella came to the throne in 1474, Castile was in a state of despair due to her brother Henry's reign. It was not unknown that Henry IV was a big spender and did little to enforce the laws of his kingdom. It was even said by one Castilian denizen of the time that murder, rape and robbery happened without punishment.
Because of this, Isabella needed desperately to find a way to reform her kingdom due to the measures imposed. Historians during her lifetime saw her to be more inclined to justice than to mercy, and indeed far more rigorous and unforgiving than her husband Ferdinand.
On January 2, 1492, Isabella and Ferdinand entered Granada to receive the keys of the city, and the principal mosque was reconsecrated as a church. The Treaty of Granada was signed later that year, and in it Ferdinand and Isabella gave their word to allow the Muslims and Jews of Granada to live in peace.
Just 3 months after entering Granada, Queen Isabella agreed to sponsor Christopher Columbus on an expedition to reach the Indies by sailing west. The Crown agreed to pay a sum of money as a concession from monarch to subject. His expedition departed on the 3rd of August 1492 and arrived in San Salvador Island on the 12th of October. He named it San Salvador after Jesus the Saviour. He returned the next year and presented his findings to the monarchs, bringing natives and gold under a hero's welcome.
Isabella's plans for her eldest 2 children did not work out. Her only son, John of Asturias, died shortly after his marriage, and her daughter Isabella of Aragon, whose son Miguel de Paz died at the age of 2. Queen Isabella I crown passed to her 3rd child, Joanna, and her son-in-law, Philip I.
However, she did make successful dynastic matches for her 2 youngest daughters. The death of Isabella of Aragon created a necessity for Manuel I of Portugal to remarry, and Isabella's 3rd daughter, Maria of Aragon, became his next bride. Isabella's youngest daughter, Catherine of Aragon, married England's Arthur, Prince of Wales, but his early death resulted in her being married to his younger brother, King Henry VIII of England.
Isabella officially withdrew from governmental affairs on September 14, 1504. She died the same year on the 26th of November at the Medina del Campo Royal Palace. It is said that she had truly already been in decline since the death of her son, Prince John of Asturias, in 1497. Today she's entombed in Granada in the Capilla Real.
She lies alongside her husband Ferdinand, her daughter Joanna, and Joanna's husband Philip I, and Isabella's 2-year-old grandson Miguel de Paz. The museum next to the Capilla Real holds her crown and sceptre. Isabella is most remembered for enabling Columbus's voyage to the New World, which began an era for greatness for Spain and Europe, but in particular her reign saw the founding of the Spanish Empire.
Henry's next mother-in-law would be the one that gave him quite possibly the most famous wife of his reign. Elizabeth Boleyn, the Countess of Wiltshire, was born in 1480 and became an English noblewoman, especially noted for being the mother of Anne Boleyn and as such the maternal grandmother of Elizabeth I of England.
Elizabeth received honours in her life, first becoming the Viscountess Rochford in 1525, when her husband was elevated to the peerage.
Elizabeth was born into the wealthy and influential Howard family as the eldest of two daughters of Thomas Howard, the second Duke of Norfolk, and his first wife, Elizabeth Tilney. Her family managed to survive the fall of their patron, King Richard III, who was killed at Bosworth in 1485. His position was taken by King Henry VII. When she was about 5 years old, Elizabeth became a part of the royal court as a young girl.
It was while she was at court that she wed Thomas Boleyn, an ambitious young courtier, sometime before 1500. According to Thomas, his wife was pregnant many times in the next few years, but only 3 children lived to adulthood. The 3 children were Mary Boleyn, the mistress of Henry VIII of England, Anne Boleyn, the Queen Consort of Henry VIII of England, and George Boleyn, Viscount Rochford.
Throughout this time, Elizabeth was a lady-in-waiting at the royal court, first to Elizabeth of York and then to Catherine of Aragon. In 1519, Elizabeth's daughters Anne and Mary were living in the French royal court as ladies-in-waiting to the French Queen Consort Claude, but Mary's reputation grew, and not in what you would call a good way.
Mary was by far the most promiscuous of Elizabeth's daughters, with several affairs. Anne, on the other hand, was much closer to her mother. Elizabeth had been in charge of her children's early education, including Anne's, and she taught her to play on various musical instruments, to sing and to dance, as well as embroidery.
In 1525, Henry VIII fell in love with Anne, and Elizabeth became her protective chaperone. She accompanied Anne to court, and since Anne was attempting to avoid a sexual relationship with the king, Elizabeth travelled with Anne to view York Place after the fall of the Boleyn family's great political opponent, Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, an intrigue which had given Anne her first real taste of political power. She was crowned queen 4 years later.
Elizabeth remained in her daughter's household throughout her time as Queen Consort. Elizabeth Boleyn, though, sided with the rest of the family when her eldest daughter Mary was banished in 1535 for eloping with a commoner, William Stafford. Mary had initially expected her sister's support, but Anne was furious at the breach of etiquette and refused to receive her.
Only a year later, the family was overtaken by a greater scandal. Elizabeth's younger daughter Anne and her only living son George were executed on charges of treason, adultery and incest. Anne's 2 chief biographers both concluded that these charges were fabricated. They also agreed that the king wanted to marry Jane Seymour. Beyond this obvious fact, the sequence of events is unclear, and historians are divided about whether the key motivation for Anne's downfall was her husband's hatred of her or her political ambitions.
Following the annihilation of the family's ambitions, Elizabeth retired to the countryside. She died only 2 years after her younger children, and her husband died the following year. Elizabeth is buried now in the Howard family chapel at St Mary's Church, Lambeth. The church was decommissioned in 1972, but is now a garden museum. Join us next time as we look at the next 2 mothers-in-law of Henry VIII.